Okay, so welcome everyone. Nice to see you all here. Hope you're all well, all safe, handling yourself just fine. So let's get to that. Let's get ready for our mentor day today. So according to the schedule, today we can focus on that task about the JavaScript classes and inheritance. So I will be doing some, guess what, some live coding, and I'll be taking your questions. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. I hope you all can already see it. Great. So let's have a look on what the task was about, right? So we need to create a base class that will contain some common methods and then two child classes that will inherit from this base. Int builder, which would have to be in the ES6 style, meaning using the class keyword, and the string builder in the ES5 style, meaning using functions. So almost all methods should be chainable for handy usage. So there is one specific method that will not be, and you can add your own methods and properties to the class, but the method described below must be on your solution, right? So that's the minimum things that we should do. So we have here the API that we are expecting. There is a static method in it and some example usage, the same for the string builder. So let's think on how we need to get started. So the best place for us to get started to solve this this task would be by the base class, because the other two will depend on it. And this base class must contain some common methods. So basically, there are different ways that we can interpret this, and I will be discussing a few situations with you. The first thing that we need to do that's not defined and need to decide is how we are going to create this base class. And should we create it on ES5 or ES6 style? So because we will have to create another class in ES5 style that needs to inherit from our base, then it's pretty hard to do the manual inheritance from a class that was defined in the ES6 style and the class syntax. So because of that, it's preferable to start this base class also in the ES5 style. So this way, we will start on the ES5 style and then grow to the newer syntax instead of going the other way around. Okay. So I have my editor here. Inheritance.js, and let me increase this font size. I think I use maybe 17 or 16, so I'll leave it aside and ask you to tell me if it's good enough. Function. Let me just prepare another thing here. So it'll be easier for me to work with you and leave the comments visible for me. So if you write anything, I'll be able to see it. Okay, great. So font size 17 or maybe 16. Okay, so function, I'll call it abstract builder. So basically, when we are dealing with object-oriented programming, then when we have an abstract class, this class is not meant to be used directly and just meant to be used as a base for other classes. And we do not have the concept of abstract classes in JavaScript, but it's interesting to follow at least the naming convention and express this intention that this class won't be meant to be used directly, right? Okay, so we have some questions if it's possible to solve with ES6 base class. Well, it is possible, but the ES6 base, when we create a class with ES6, then the properties in it and so the way that these methods and properties are defined inside this class is a bit more complex than the way it's defined with function. So the simplest way to solve it is with the Es5 as a base. It's not impossible, but for the sake of this example, that's the easiest way for you guys to handle it. All right, so we have our base function, and according to the requirements, we need to put some common methods. What do we know that is common between those two classes? We know that both of them, when we talk about the constructor, they should receive a value and will be operating on this value, and we can get it after doing the operations that we want. Right, so we know that we should receive some value and we need to store this value in our class. So we use the this keyword, so we are handling this new instance that we'll be creating, and I'm creating a property in this instance also called value, which will contain the value that we received, right? So no magic here, pretty straightforward. And the only common method between those two classes when we talk about implementation will be the get method. So I'll get started with this one. Since we're using the functional approach for this class, then remember that we need to use the prototype to create methods. So prototype get will be a function. And this get, the only thing that it does actually is return this dot value. Right, so this is the only method that won't be chainable as we saw before on the requirements. And basically that's it. This is the minimum needed for our builder. I know that there are other methods that have the same name or even the same fully signature, meaning like the same input, but the operations inside, they differ. And I've seen some implementations where people were creating these methods inside the base class and then doing some checking the type of the input, or type of equals string, then I'm going to do this, else I'm going to do other thing. And that is not really a very good approach to take inside your classes. So basically what we're going to do here, it will be creating two classes that will extend our base, one specifically for integers and another specifically for string. So the type specific implementations, they should live inside those type specific classes. Right? This way, this base class that we have will not be overloaded with specific implementation that is only relevant for a specific type. Because right now in our requirements, we are talking about int and string. But I don't know, maybe in the future we would have float, maybe we would have booleans, maybe we would have dates, maybe we would have other stuff. And if you put the type checking inside your abstract class here, inside your base class, then you would have to, every time you decide to support a different type, you would have to come back to this and change this this builder to support this new type, right? So that's a better approach for you. Olena is asking about the plus does the same. Yes, the plus is a special case here because it can the plus operator, it will do the actual numerical sum between numbers, between ints, and between strings it will concatenate. So yes, in this specific case we could implement the plus in the abstract builder and have one single implementation for both classes. But I personally wouldn't solve it like that because it works in this specific situation. But if we decide to support new builders for another types, as I was talking about, then that may not be the case, right? Maybe plus won't work for every data type. So I personally would recommend to have the builder only with really generic functions like that, without understanding the different types that can exist. But then, of course, it wouldn't be wrong if we implemented the plus here. But it, in my opinion, it starts to get a bit subjective, but it's all about future maintenance of your code. So it's always good when we are writing code and thinking about future usage if possible. Of course, you should not over prepare for every single situation, but still your code should be maintainable to some level, be able to be extended with new functionalities later without having to rework what you currently have. Okay, so from my perspective, if I would be solving this this myself, then that's the minimum. That's what I would have in my abstract builder, in my base class. So let's go to the next part. The next part, then we have the int builder, and the int builder we are asking to use it in ES6 syntax. So the ES6 syntax, we use class int builder extends. So remember about this keyword, and we extend abstract builder. Okay. Now, do we need to write a constructor for this class? Well, what I need the int builder to do is to store a value. So just this default behavior works for us. I do not really need to change this part. But if we look at the requirements, it says, let me bring it over here, that the constructor for the int builder takes a start integer, but if not passed, it starts with 0. So this is an extra requirement that we should be able to handle. So then in this case, yes, we can have our own constructor to handle this part. So we're still going to receive the value and immediately call super, the constructor of our super class, with this value. right? So I'm calling the constructor of the abstract builder, basically executing this. But to handle this extra requirement, the simplest way for us to have it would be to use the default values in the parameters, right? So if the user does not provide a value, then it will start with 0 and call our constructor of our base class. Okay, so we got this first part. And then we have the methods implementations. So I'll do quickly here the plus, and the plus should be able to take an infinity number of integers and sum all of them. Right? So instead of defining A, B, C here, we can just use the rest operator, 3 dots, and have values. So there are multiple ways that you can solve this task, multiple ways that you can sum all of them. So I'm going to show two approaches. And I'll get started with the imperative way with the for. So we can use for each number n of values. And what do I want to do for each of those values? I want to this dot value plus equal n, right? So this dot value will be equal the value that we had already here plus the value of n. And so this is just a shorter operator to sum the existing value and save and persist the value in the property again. And the last requirement that we had is that the method should be chainable. So the chainable will change the return for my plus. So I will return this. Okay, so plus will be receiving an infinity amount of values. We are looping through each of those values, summing to value, and returning our instance again, so that we can call our function again. So I think that's a good time to do some basic test. So number, oh, no space, my number, new int builder, number dot 5, and then because it's chainable, plus, I can call plus again, 2, console.log my number dot get. Okay, so I'll run this code. Let me track this output here. And I got 17. All right, 10, 5, 2. So our plus is working and the methods are chainable. All right, everything pretty straightforward. This is the iterative approach. So let me show you the functional approach, and I'll show it with the minus method. So again, minus should be able to receive multiple values. And since values is an array has methods in it. And one of those methods is called reduce, which we can think of it as a way to reduce our multiple values into a single accumulated value that we can operate and pass forward each iteration. Right, so I'll create here a function. So it's a bit easier for us to understand in case you do not know too much about the reduce function, the reduce method itself. So I'll create here, I'll call it soup for subtract, and it will be just a simple arrow function a and b, and it will return a minus b. And now I'll say that this dot value will be equal values reduce. The first parameter is the accumulator function. In this case, will be our subtraction function. And the second parameter, important one, since people usually forget to provide it, is the initial value for this loop. Right, so here in this case, the initial value for our reduction, for our operation, should be the value that I already have. So what's going to happen? This function, soup, will be called in the first iteration with a being the value that we provided here, and b being the first item in our values array. Then the return of this first call will be passed as the value a of the next call, with b being the second item, and so on and so forth. So always the result of this function, the return value of the function, will be used as the input for the next iteration. Okay. And then whatever is the result of this reduction, I'm assigning back to value. And as before, for the method to be chainable, I return this. Minus 1. Run. Now I get 16. 5 here. 11. Okay, so it's working. Okay, I got a question from Przemysław. I'll copy your question and paste it here so that we know what everyone knows about it. Okay, so in this case, you're calling your input n, right? So his question is if we could make it like this. The first thing that we need to do is run and ensure that the answer is the same, right? Okay, it's working. So as we can see, it works. The short answer is yes, you can just make it like that. But there are a few issues with the solution. The first one, let's get started here, is here. Look, n is already an array, and you are spreading the items of this array inside a new array. Right, so we are effectively cloning the value n. And here, there is no useful reason for that. So this is just not bringing any benefit. You're just like doing more operations than needed. So the first optimization that we can do is change this to be just n. Okay, it will work just the same, and we are not really changing. Reduce does not change the array that we called it on. So it is an immutable operation. So it's safe. We do not need to clone the array to operate on it. So let me clear this and run again. Ensure that the value is still the same. Okay. Then we have the other issue, which is you're not passing the second parameter on for reduce, which means that the first call will consider the first iteration as empty. And then JavaScript has some auto casting built in, so depending on the value of the other variable will change how the empty variable will behave. So for me, this is a problem that you're relying on this automatic behavior, this automatic casting that will change behavior according to the type. So I would personally really recommend that you always set the second parameter in the reduce, right? So in this case, since what you're doing here is summing all the inputs, then start with 0. So this way you are sure that about what is going to be on the first iteration, right? And not relying on this autocast. And number the results to 11. So yeah, so this works just fine. So first here we are summing all the values that we received in the input, and then we can see here minus equal. So we are subtracting this total from the value that we already had. So this works just fine. But then again, it's just like a minor optimization. Of course, it won't matter that much. But in my solution before, I had one operation less, right? So suppose that we had 10 numbers in our parameters. So in my operation here, we would have 10 operations happened here, 10 subtractions. In this solution, we have 10 additions and 1 subtraction, so 11 operations, you know. So we're just doing one extra operation that it's not really needed in this case. So they are equivalent. That, of course, this one extra operation is not going to cause you any performance issues in this situation, but yeah, so just alternative ways to look at it. Okay. So if there are any questions, any other thing that you'd like to discuss, any other possibilities, please paste them on the chat, and we will be discussing them. All right, let me look here if there's anything special. We have the other three methods: multiply, divide, and mod for module. And just they're pretty straightforward. I'll implement just one here. So multiply, and so this value plus times equal, and return this for chaining. Okay. So the same could be done for the other three operators. So nothing too special here. The last special requirement in this int builder was random, and it's being asked to have a static method random. So since we are having an ES6 syntax, then this method starts with static keyword random. Then we have min and max values, and we'll need to do some specific calculation here. So basically, in JavaScript library, we have the math random. So let me call r math. and call it. So math random returns a number to us, a random number. But this random number will be between 0 and 1, and it does not support the min and max parameters as we have here. And since we are inside an int builder, then we expect that we will have a random int, right? So not a random float, just like math random gives us. So we need to have like a small math calculation here. So I'll calculate the delta. So basically the difference between the two numbers that we receive. And I'll return. And then here I'm going to call another math operator, floor. So this will basically round whatever number that I provide down, round up to the greatest integer, right? So the documentation is here. And it will be our R times our delta plus the minimum value, right? So if we wanted, for example, a number between 2 and 5, then delta will be 3, and R times delta will be between 0 and 3 because R is between 0 and 1. And then we sum the minimum value, in this case 2, then we would have between 2 and 5 as requested. Okay, so pretty straightforward. So I see no questions, so I assume that everything is clear. Now let's have a quick look at the string builder. So string builder was requested to be, okay, before I go to it, why static? The first, the quickest answer to why static is because it was on the requirements. So we get here the task, then random should be a static method. But the long answer to that, why this should be static, is because this is not really operating in a value that you create with int builder, right? So this method, as we can see, does not rely on this. So if it does not rely on this, then it's a good candidate to be a static method, because the way we are going to call this method is not like my number.random, because if we would call my number.random here, it doesn't make much sense because you're not trying to get a random value out of the value that we already have here. Right? So it's just a generic method. It's not operating over a specific value. So the way we would call it would be int builder.random. So it's a random inside int builder. So if I save this, and oh, forgot the parameters, not a number, of course. So 3 and 5, as we discussed before. Then got 3, run again. Oh, 3, run again. Oh, it's not really random. Did I do something wrong? Or just like that coincidence? Let's have a huge difference. 334 and 351. Yeah, so it was really coincidence. Multiple trees. So 1, 4, 7, 6. Yeah. Okay, so that's the reason for static, because we are not operating over specific instance value, then we make it static, so we'll call it straight from the class name. And it was not in the requirement, but honestly, we could even make this random to also be what we call a factory. So this would be something extra. So let me actually clone this method. Create another one. So random instance. So basically, let me const n will be int builder random min and max, and what we can return new int builder n. So now we have a static method that actually not only generates a random number, but even returns a new instance of our builder. So this kind of method we call factory. So it helps you build an instance of an existing class. Okay. So just show this works. And you can see the log. It's an instance of int builder and the value inside for 1. Run again. 352. Okay, so this you may hear as a factory. All right, so moving forward to string builder. String builder was requested to be on ES5 style. So it's ES5. It has to start with a function. String builder. And it has the same requirement, or at least an equivalent requirement as the constructor for the int builder, meaning that it has a default value in case the user does not provide one when constructing. So we can solve it in a similar way. Value and give it a default value. And then the equivalent of the super call, right? So in the ES6 syntax, we would call super and value. And here with ES5, unfortunately, we do not have something that is that easy. So we need to call our abstract builder, and this is abstract builder is just a function. So we can call this function, and the first parameter of the call is what should be the value of this inside the abstract builder function. So I want the value of this keyword inside abstract builder function to be the same value of this that I have in the string builder call right now. So I'll just pass this. And then the list of parameters that I want to call abstract builder with. In this case, it's just value. Okay, so this is how my constructor will look like. Question: why is this plugin with play? Oh, what's the? Okay, so this is just an extension that I have. Let me quickly show you. There's this code runner extension. Okay, so this code runner will give you this little play here, and it can execute multiple languages. So in this case of JavaScript, it just runs Node for me, and it's just easier for those demos and pretty handy for quick tests. All right, so carry on. String builder. This is a constructor in the ES5 syntax, and we need to call the constructor of our base class, in this case abstract builder, but we do not want to create even another instance. We want to reuse the instance that we already have. So we just call this, keeping the same value of this. Then we have to extend the methods of the abstract builder. So what we did in the implementation, we extended the constructor, but not the methods, because those things, we need to handle them separately. So the way to do it is to say that the prototype of string builder will be a new or a clone of the prototype of abstract builder. So the object class in JavaScript has a static method called create that will basically clone another object or create, as we see in the documentation here, another object based on one that we provide. So in this case, will be the prototype of abstract builder. Okay, so now all the methods from abstract builder are available to our string builder. And on our class, I showed you a good practice. So it's not required, but again, good practice, something to that it's better if we keep doing, which is to say that the constructor of string builder is our string builder. Okay, so we can just make sure this works by string parameter and log my string dot diagram, and here it's empty because let me see. Oh, I think I can do a JSON file to show you that it's actually an empty string. It won't show here. Okay, never mind. Or oh, I know, I can just do a type of. So of my string get, and we'll see that it's a string, right? So what we really have logged here is an empty string. It's not undefined or not null, right? So this way we ensure that the type is actually a string. And if we provided test, yeah, type of is still string, and log test. And the way that we need to add methods to an ES5 class is by adding properties to the prototype. So we saw it before with the get method there. So basically we can just go here, prototype dot, what's the first method? Plus. So plus will be equal a function. And this plus, does it require multiple? Yes, it was asking for multiple strings. So we can have multiple strings, and we can use any of the ways that we saw before with reduce or with for. So they will all work. But just for the sake of showing something different, so I'm going to say that this value is equal, or even better, plus equal string, since this is an array of strings, and an array has a method called join that joins all of them in a single string with some specific separator, but I'll just say that the separator is an empty string. So all the items of the string array will be joined together without any separator and then concatenated to the value that I already have as my this. Return this for chaining. My string dot plus clear it, run test foobar. Okay, so foobar joined in a single string and concatenated with the value that we had before. All right, let me see some interesting methods that we could implement as well. So sub, well, let's do the subtraction of string. So string builder prototype sub, and it should receive the index that we want to start extracting the string. So it will be like a from index, and what will be the length of our string. So let me call it length. So yeah, so basically the sub will just extract part of the string that we have and keep it as the actual value. So there are multiple ways that we can implement. So you can check the documentation for strings and check the methods that exist. So you could use a method called substring. There is a method called substr as well that you can use. And there is a method that exists in both strings and arrays that's called slice. I'll use a slice here, but all the other approaches are valid. So this dot value slice, and as we can see the documentation, the first parameter is the index that we are starting. So the index that we are starting is from, and the second parameter is the position at the end, so the index in the end. So in this case, we do not have this variable. It will be just from plus length. Okay, and then return. So we can test it here on our string dot sub for 3, for example. I run and get foo, right? So it started on the index number 4, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and length 3. So that was the part of the string that was subtracted and kept. Okay, now not too much to talk about that, just reading the documentation of the methods and checking how they work, what are the inputs and the outputs. Let me say another thing that will be interesting. Okay, question from Natasha. Do we need to add some validation to our task implementation? For example, check if parameter integer, where are we expecting that? Something like if checking the type of. Okay, maybe that just bring the question here. Type of number or is finite and half round and so on. Well, again, it depends. In general, my recommendation for you when you will be creating your code is to do this kind of check as little as possible. I mean, do not do those manual type checks everywhere. Okay, because sometimes we can rely in another thing that I mentioned before, some autocasting, right? So we can provide one data type that that JavaScript will convert to the type that we want, and if they are providing a string and we are trying to sum, then the result will already be something that is not expected. So there will be like native issues that will occur. But more importantly is that we could even have, let me show you one example. Let me think of a nice example to you. If we implement, for example, in string builder, the method prototype called toString, and I will return. I'll even reuse the methods that we have. I'll return this.get or this.value would be the same thing, right? So I'm creating this toString method. Look what happens when I actually cause a second string, new string builder. String 2, and I do string 2 dot plus and here I want to log string 2. Okay, so my string here, after all the operations that we had, was just full, and I added it to the string that I had before, string 2, and it actually added string 2 dot foo. Right, so if I comment this and I run, didn't save, sorry. Now I have it. So look what's the result. String 2 was concatenated with my string, and it has this object, right? So that's the default conversion to string from JavaScript objects. So just like outputting the type. ToString is a special method that will be used whenever we try to use our instance as a string somewhere. So basically our plus method was joining and converting all the values that we passed to a string. So if there would be number, if there would be Boolean, everything would be converted to string. Even if we provide another string builder, right? So if we type checked here to ensure that every string that we had, every input here was exactly of type of string, then this here wouldn't work because the value that I'm providing here does not have type of string. It has a type of is actually a string builder, but it can get automatically casted to string using our toString method, right? So that's why if you type check too much, then your library, your function becomes less flexible. So, but that's not to say that type checking is bad, right? So there are situations in which they will be useful. So it's all about like evaluating the amount of flexibility that you would like to have in your method with the amount of precision of what's the input and output. Okay. Right, then the next comment here is like it did not ask for that, but here, more than just solving the task that was provided, I'm giving you some insights on how this could be in a real project, right? Because in a real project, you may have a need to create a type builder, but no one will specify it step by step on how it should work. So you need to create it yourself based on how you see this being used in your project. So here I'm giving you this extra piece of knowledge about knowing to evaluate how flexible your methods should be, or how precise you want to get with the type checks. So type checks are not bad, but we need to avoid overusing it, because JavaScript is flexible and we can use this flexibility in our favor sometimes. Let me see any other interesting situation. Could you explain reduce once again? Yes, of course. So let's check the example that we already have, and let me think how it would be nice. Okay, so I'll just go back with the code that I had before. Do I have minus being used? I have. So minus. Okay, so I'll change our minus here to be 1, 2, and 3. And I will put a breakpoint here, so we will be able to step through. Node.js. Oh, did I do something wrong? Values. Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. There we go. Oh, the breakpoint actually went inside. Okay, let me just do it in a better way. All right, so our function is just starting. So this dot value has 17. Let me add it to the watch. This dot value. Okay, so this dot value 17. And our n, our input, is an array of 1, 2, and 3. Now we will get started on the call of reduce. So I'll step into. Now I'm inside this soup here, and we can expand local, and we will see what are the values that we have inside here. So we see that A is 17 and B is 1. And why is that? Because 17 is the value that we asked to start. So this dot value was 17 before. So A in the first call will be 17. And then B will be the first value in our array. Our array was 1, 2, and 3. So the first call, 17 and 1, and the return here will be 16, right? So if I step into for the next call, okay, we got here the return value 16. So step into again. Now we are in the second call. The second call, A is now 16 and B is 2, because A was the return value of our previous call to sub, and B is now having the second value of our array. And now we'll have 16 minus 2. So step into, we get the return value will be 14. And 14 will be used as the first value of the next call. So if I do step into again, we'll see that A will be 14 and B will be the next value in our array. So basically what reduce is doing is calling our function that we provide in the first parameter once per each value in our array. So the first call B will be 1, on the second B will be 2, and the third B will be 3. What is changing is the first parameter, A. So A starts with the value that we provide, and then for every next call will be the return of the previous call. Right, so basically we are going through each item in our array and carrying over a single value for the next calls over and over and over. That's what reduce is doing. So that's why we call it reduce, because we are reducing this entire array to one single return value. And then of course the value that you're collecting does not have to be the same type of your array. You could have an object, you could have a string, and collect it in any way you want. The only thing is the second parameter will be used in the first call, and for all the next calls the first parameter will be the return value of the previous call. And then the return value of the last call is actually what's going to be returned from the entire call here. Okay, is that clear? Yes, great. So where was I? Oh, okay, so I was just showing like the magic method toString. So feel free to implement toString in your classes whenever you need some help in debugging or automatically casting it to string when you include it in another in another string. There are native classes that implement toString for you, and this can be useful sometimes. All right, so let me see one more interesting method, some different way to solve. Okay, let's go with the multiply. Multiply, I have an interesting solution for you. So string builder, prototype, multiply equals a function. And so what multiply does is whatever value that we have stored should be multiplied and concatenated n times. Right, so if I have test and I multiply by 2, I should get test. Okay, someone has the microphone on. Okay, now it's muted. All right, so multiply. So again, there are multiple ways that you could implement multiply. So I'm going to show you a different way. And it will be using methods of array. So basically, let me create a new array, and the array has a static method from that helps you convert objects that look like array, but they are not exactly an array. And so you probably remember seeing on the class about functions that there was this argument keyword which existed in functions, and that arguments actually looked like an array, but it was not really an array, just an object with keys, those numerical keys, but the array methods were not available in it. And as we start doing work directly with the DOM, so whenever you do like a query selector all, what this returns to you is a class named node list that looks like an array, but it's not an exact array. So if you want to use array methods in it, you would use array from. Anyway, so here I'm talking a lot about it, but that's what I'm going to do is, as you can see in the documentation, I can provide an iterable, so anything that can be iterated over, or something that is array-like. So what I'm going to provide is an object with the length property, and here I'm going to tell length equals n. So this will, this will be considered an array-like object because I'm setting a length property, and length is like this special property on arrays. So what array from will do will return for me an actual array with size or with length n, but all the values in it will be empty. Okay, so now I have an array, but with empty values. The array has a method, array has a method called fill that will actually take the value that we give it and make this value and put this value in all the items, right? So value to fill the array section with. So I want to fill my array with the value that I already have. So now if I have number 2 and value was test, then this here will return an array with test and test. And as the last step, I will join. So I will join these values that I have with an empty string. So this will be my separator. And this way I'll effectively multiply the value that I had by n. Oh, there's something wrong with my shortcuts. Return this. Let's check. So, oh, okay, let me comment everything here. So my string is just test. My string 3 string run test. Okay, so what I did here, I created an array with length 3, filled it all the values with the value that I already had in my string, and join everything together. Okay, so this is just a way to show off some new methods in the array. But again, there are multiple ways that we could have implemented this. What about repeat function for strings in multiply method? Yes, that's also a possibility. As I mentioned, there are multiple ways. Let me show you. I think I talked to you on our last class about the DevDocs website. I have it saved as an app here. So string and repeat. So we can check the documentation, how it works, and string repeat is actually what we just implemented. It receives count. The only thing, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, is that it was described later in ES6, right? So this is an ES6 functionality, which may not be available in all the browsers. So in case you need to support Internet Explorer, then repeat won't be available there. But yeah, if you do not care about Internet Explorer, or if you are providing polyfills, then feel free to use it as well. So I just wanted to show a fun way to use arrays. So reduce would also work. Yes, so reduce, you could use reduce, you could use map, you could use a for, yeah, multiple ways that we could solve it. Each way with their pros and cons. But definitely the most straightforward way would be with string repeat. Anything that's special? Divide, it's straightforward. Remove. Okay, so remove had a special requirement, if I recall correctly. Yeah, so let's bring it here. The remove method asks the string that we are provided to be taken off the value that we have stored, but we are prohibited to use string replace. Okay, so that's just like an extra challenge to you. Nothing wrong with the replace itself, but just for you to think alternative ways to solve the problem. What I'm going to show you is one of these ways. So it's called remove. And I want to remove some specific string. So yeah, so my value will be what? Well, you're going to see that I actually enjoy arrays, so I'm going to use arrays again in my solution. So strings, they have a method called split. So this dot value dot split, and what split does, it will get a string here, and every time that it finds this string in my initial string, it will remove it and create multiple items, right? So maybe, oh, I have my debugger running, so I can even have a test to you. Can I? Okay, so I'll return to this. I think I'm talking too much about things in some generic way, so I want to give you an example. So ABC 0, DEF 0, QWERTY, okay, and dot split. And then on string 0. Right, so the return for this will be an array with 3 items, ABC, DEF, and QWERTY. So basically 0 was removed and created an array of the strings in between. So I can split on string, and right after I can join everything together with an empty string. Okay, so effectively I'll be removing all the occurrences of string from my previous value just by creating an intermediary array and joining everything together in a single string. So that's a quick way to solve. And then of course, turn this. Yeah, Natasha solved it. Przemysław, this value split, an empty string and a filter. Okay, so that's a good thing that you provided here. I'll bring it to our discussion because I do have a special comment about it. So let me comment this and change this to be value as we have here, and value and string. Okay, yeah, everything's fine. Okay, so Przemysław gave an alternative way for us. So what he's doing is splitting, but he's splitting on an empty string. So what this will do is actually create an array of every single individual characters. Okay, so if we go back to the string that we had before, and if I split on empty string, then notice that we got all the characters as individual positions in the array. So he does that, and then he filters out the values that would match string, right? So basically we're keeping, so filter, we choose what we want to keep. We want to keep all the characters that are not equal to string, and then we join together with empty string. So this works, but only works when your input is a single character, right? So let's do a test right now. So, okay, we have test, and instead of multiply, I will remove. So if here I ask to remove t, and I log my net, it's clear and run, it works. But what if I actually wanted to remove ES? And I run, uh-oh, it didn't work, right? So again, it depends on what was required. So this solution is not wrong, and it matches the requirements as we saw in here, right? So taken string str from store. Okay, so actually even here I would argue that it does not match exactly. The example uses a single character, but here the input does not mention that it was supposed to be one single character, right? It's just supposed to be a string, and string can have any length. So this partially solves what was asked. So if I comment this and then comment this previous solution, and I run, now we see that the ES that I requested to be removed was removed. So this is something that we need to be aware of, right? So maybe ask to clarify the requirements, or in a real project to just be sure to know if what you are supposed to be receiving could be slightly different than what you would be actually expecting. So this is an alternative way to solve, but keep in mind it will work only for single characters. Let me see if there's anything interesting that I separated here. Not really. So those were all the examples that I wanted to show. So I will paste in the chat something that I prepared for my mentees, which is a complete solution of this exercise. So it's a GIST with my personal solution to it. And in it, I actually added one extra thing that to Abstract Builder, which basically I created all those general methods, plus, minus, multiply, and divide. I placed it in my Abstract Builder, so you can see that I'm looping through all those methods and creating this method in my prototype. And the basic implementation of them will be to simply throw. Method is not yet implemented. So this is something that you see, especially in languages like Java, when you have abstract builders. So there is a method that subclasses are expected to provide. So this is just one extra thing that you can have a look. But honestly, I would just do it in case it would be like really required. Otherwise, that's the minimum solution for abstract builder that matches our requirements. And apart from that, everything will be pretty similar to what we discussed today. The static random method, constructor receiving a default property, imperative loop, functional loop with reduce, multiply, divide, mod, string builder, default parameter, calling manually the abstract builder, passing this, extending manually abstract builder, setting the constructor again, and implementing the other methods. So plus with string join, sub with slice, minus, oh, minus actually I reused other methods, right? So we had sub to extract. So I'm reusing the sub method here. Multiply, divide, remove, and the test just like it existed. All right, any further question? Maybe related to this or maybe related to anything else in JavaScript? While allow you guys to think about your question if you may have. I have the next task that you'll be implementing, which will be to implement a virtual keyboard. And so basically you have your page to show keys and you have to lay out just like an actual keyboard. You have a text area at the top, and as you press the keys as you'd expect, those characters should be added to the text that you have in the text area. But more than that, as you actually press things in your physical keyboard, you should highlight those keys as you press them in the virtual keyboard. So the virtual keyboard should actually be aware of what you are also typing in your real keyboard. Okay, so let's go here on the requirements. Design up to you. Index should start empty and you will render everything with JS. Pressing a key in the physical keyboard will highlight the keys in the virtual keyboard. When handling keyboards, different operating systems behave slightly different from one another. So just in your task, inform your mentor about which operating system you are using when solving your task. Yeah, this is a corner case. If several buttons are pressed, then you need to highlight all of them. There's no exceptions for the special keys. And we should be able to switch the language, right? So you can implement any keyboard shortcut that you want for that, but then you re-render the keys in the different language, you know, Russian or Greek or whatever you choose. And the last used language should be persisted on page reloads, right? So if you change the language and you reload the page, the language that was before should stay. Yeah, you need to indicate the keyboard shortcut in the page so the user will know how to use your application. Add some animations. Clicking on the buttons with the mouse should actually type the symbols. Text navigation, pressing enter is a line break. Tab will add a horizontal indent. So as you would expect the keys to actually behave. Okay, and a reminder that special JavaScript libraries are not allowed. So you need to implement this using what we call vanilla JavaScript. So just like the native methods, but you can use some CSS preprocessors. ESLint with the Airbnb base. And the special requirement as well is to host your working application in GitHub pages. So in GitHub, if you use a branch named GH pages, then it will automatically host it to you on some special URL. just like we see here, right? Okay, so just have a read here to know more details, but your repository will have the HTML served for you. Special requirements on how to handle the comments. So this, I think, is pretty straightforward. And how to actually create your merge request. So you should include a self-check. How do you think you performed on this task? What have you implemented? What you maybe chose to not implement? Anything special here? Yeah, just keep your pull request clean. And the scoring. And some links that will be useful, some documentation to events and DOM methods. And that's it. Okay, so virtual keyboard. So we can't choose English and Polish layout because the keyboard looks the same. Yeah, Przemysław. Unfortunately, English and Polish won't do any visual change here. So choose some different special language with different characters. So your application will be a bit more interesting. Okay, so if there won't be any more questions, then that's it for today. Thank you all for attending. I hope it was useful and clarified, or you managed to learn a few extra things. And have a nice evening. Bye bye.